Hello, everyone out there. Hello, fellow Metroid fans. It's another Metroid Prime 4 Beyond video, my brand new favorite kind of video to make. And in today's Metroid video, I'm going to revisit one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite formats of video, which I like to do every once in a while. Many of you guys know, and it's a Q&A. So I put a call out on Twitter and I put a call out on the YouTube community page. And I said, if you have Metroid Prime 4 Beyond questions, I want you to send them to me. I'm going to pick a few from Twitter. I'm going to pick a few from YouTube, give you guys a shout out, and read some of these questions so I can kind of respond to some of what you guys are thinking and wondering about when it comes to Metroid Prime 4. And you guys want to know my thoughts on your thoughts, so this is a great excuse for me to do so. Just a quick reminder before I jump into these. If, of course, you want to be a part of these in the future, then I definitely invite you to follow me on Twitter, where I am super, super active. I'm posting about movies and Metroid and video games and just random thoughts all the freaking time. So I both hate Twitter, but I also use Twitter a lot. So it is a great way to interact with me because I love interacting with you guys there as well. And of course, I usually do these callouts on Twitter. So again, that is a great place to do that. But let's put all that stuff aside. I could not answer everyone's questions. I got almost 200 questions. I've only got 14 in total today. So let's jump into these Metroid questions. First question comes from one of the only fans and people I've ever gotten to meet in person from running Rule of Two Review, and it is my buddy Derek Price at Dereklees260. I've never known how to actually say that. What is up, my man Derek? Thanks for the question, buddy. And here is what he asks me. He says, would you prefer the beam weapons to be interchangeable like Prime 1 and 2, or would you rather them stack like Prime 3 and all the 2D Metroid titles? Which do you think will actually happen? And then, of course, thanking me for all of my great content, or my great Metroid content, I should say. So, of course, thank you too, Derek. I appreciate you, man. Great question. We talked about this on the podcast I did on Andres Restart's channel last week as well. Will Metroid Prime 4 Beyond feature changeable weapons and changeable beams, or will it feature the, quote, weapon stacking, which exactly as Derek points out, the 2D games do and Metroid Prime 3 did? So I love this question because I do have a pretty firm opinion on which I would prefer. However, there's actually something in the trailer that we saw that might be giving us a glimpse into how some of this might work, maybe. And the key word is maybe. If I could choose, I actually like the interchangeable weapons. In the 2D games, it works very well to have the weapon stacking, where you get your wave beam and you get your diffuser beam and you get your regular beam. Metroid Prime 3, of course, did this. You start with one kind of beam, and each new kind of beam you get actually stacks on top and replaces it, and will then add all of the prior abilities and bonuses you get from having that beam, basically just stack on top of each other, and it does all of the above each time you get a new beam. It works well for those games, but in Primes 1 and 2, and I think in the first-person perspective specifically, it works really, really well and is a lot of fun to change your beams and to have an ice beam or a wave beam or a power beam or a plasma beam. I think that that's actually a lot of fun. And Primes, or a dark beam and a light beam as part of Prime 2. And, they create some pretty fun world design around that where you need a certain kind of a beam to be able to open a certain kind of door, right? It's very basic, but for the time that those games came out, it was very cool, very clever. And again, it creates a more interconnected, puzzle type of woven web of a map when you have to have certain kind of beams to open certain kind of doors. And that's still achievable with the stacking, both in 2D games and in Prime 3. But I just feel like when you look at the 3 Prime games, I think that the worlds Primes 1 and 2 created using changeable beams was more interesting and fun and more of a puzzle than the way they incorporated it in Prime 3 with the weapon stacking. So that's just my personal preference. The only thing it's worth noting is if you look at the HUD on the bottom left corner of the Prime 4 trailer, we can see the missile selected as part of like a 4-quadrant select. Probably we can just guess, maybe using the D-pad possibly. And it's interesting to see the missiles, just her regular standard missiles, as the right selected option of the 4 quadrants of that part of the HUD. And so is that telling us that we're going to get different kind of missiles And will we use maybe the D-pad to select 4 different kind of missiles? Maybe it's something where just the right selection is your missiles, and maybe you would hold right on the D-pad, and then you could select missiles or whatever that secondary weapon would be through a weapon wheel that pops up if you hold that down. Or maybe the other 3 are beams and just that one is meant for missiles. It's tough to say, but it gives us a little bit of a glimpse. We don't have enough to know for sure, but I just wanted to point that out. Next question comes from Rule Time at Rule Time Space, which is actually a really good horror game and Resident Evil focused Twitter account. And so I really appreciate you asking me a question. And Rule Time asks, what did you think about Samus's visor in Metroid Prime 4? Do you think it needs to show her eyes behind the visor? So we can't take a whole lot away from the visor other than we're seeing it really mirror the shape of what her visor actually looks like. And all of the games do this to a degree. They've never really gone for accuracy, but you can see the kind of outline of what her visor is in all of the first-person Metroid games. That's just kind of standard. And so you see that in this one. Again, this is more actually matching the shape of what her visor actually looks like, which is very cool. I also love what we see of the HUD, and I love the mini-map and whatever we're seeing from the weapon select. I'm excited to understand more of how that plays into the game. Now, seeing her eyes behind the visor, yes, yes, yes. It's got to happen. It's been in all 3 prior Prime games. It's a very important way to make the player feel personally connected to Samus, make the player feel like we are playing as Samus, and just understand her as a person, behind the suit. We're not just a faceless, nameless nobody just with a bunch of weapons, just killing space pirates and Metroids and whatever is going on. It's really atmospheric and also personal touch to be able to see those reflections. And also, technically, it's very cool. It was very ahead of its time in the first Metroid Prime when they did that. And it's also worth noting, in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, it was very important to see that because the main plot of that game is Samus herself is getting more and more corrupted by Phazon throughout that journey. And you can see that reflected in her face as her corruption gets worse and worse throughout the game. And in those facial reflections, you can see it growing across her face and her eyes changing shape and color and all that. So again, that further made us feel more personally connected to Samus as a person. And so even if that kind of a thing isn't part of the plot of Prime 4, and I don't expect it to be, I still think it's important both because it's a staple for the series and because it helps us feel more like we're actually Samus. Next Twitter question comes from GMJ at GMJ, who says, do you think this will be the first Metroid game with content DLC? Obviously, we have no idea how the game itself is going to go, but would that be interesting to have new DLC areas to explore, bosses to defeat, etc.? Or would you rather the game have a sequel instead? So this is a very, very great question. I haven't really seen anyone talk about the idea of DLC for this game. Probably because, to be fair, it's very early to think about that. I hadn't even considered it until reading this question. So my main answer, based on your last part of the question, if I could choose, give me a sequel. If avoiding DLC for Prime 4 helps us get a sequel game faster, that's my choice every time. Just like I prefer new games and new entries in a franchise to remakes and remasters, which I think people get way too caught up in the hype of remake and remasters nowadays. I would always prefer a new game in that situation, and I would always prefer a new full game and a sequel to DLC. However, if DLC is a part of the plan for Prime 4 or is revealed to be a part of the plan, I would be all about it. I would love to see it. Now, you make a very important distinction in your question when you say content DLC, because it is worth noting Metroid Dread did have its own form of DLC as well. Now, Dread's DLC, while I love that they included it, it was not for me. Not interesting content. It was, what was it? They added like a new difficulty mode. Don't care about that. And they added a boss rush mode. Don't care about that. I know a lot of people love those things, and so I think it's great that they created it. I'm not a boss rush guy, and I don't play games anymore and change difficulties. When I replay a game, I don't up the difficulty. I just play it the same normal mode because I just want to re-experience the game. I'm not trying to challenge myself in certain ways. That's just not how I prefer to game. It's a huge part of gaming nowadays for a lot of people, so I support that. And ironically, I am a Dark Souls, Bloodborne fan, so I do like those kinds of challenging games for sure. But I don't replay games on harder difficulties when that's an option because I just don't personally care. So, Metroid Dread, to me, that DLC missed an opportunity to have, just like you say, new areas to explore, new enemies, new bosses, new story content. So I was really disappointed in Dread's DLC from that perspective. Prime 4, if they do DLC with new areas and new story content and whatever, I will absolutely just gobble it up. I hope that they do it. But again, back to the main question, if I could choose DLC or a sequel, I'm choosing the sequel. Next Twitter question comes from Jason at Criken Phase, who asks, first question, first sentence a little bit out of order, basically saying, will we see any cameo appearances of other hunters from Metroid Prime hunters show up in Metroid Prime 4? Also, what are your thoughts on having a run or a roll button for Samus? We only saw some gameplay in this trailer. I don't think we've seen any upgrade to Samus for controls yet. Couple of good questions there. I'll say as far as the main question, are we going to see other hunters from Metroid Prime hunters show up in Prime 4? Now, a few people asked this question. This is just the one that I chose. So I know a lot of people will get their question answered through this. So if I was to make a true prediction based on nothing more than a gut feeling and the 2-minute teaser trailer that we have currently, my gut feeling actually tells me no, you guys. And I think that the reason a lot of you guys did ask me this question is because you think it might happen, or you want it to happen, or you think I might think that it will happen. And while, of course, it's an option on the table, absolutely, I don't really see them doing that because I feel like it would take away too much from Sylux playing his own specific, very important role in this game. And I don't think that we need to start muddying the waters and expanding the one self-contained story of whatever Prime 4 is going to be by having all the hunters come back and make MCU-type cameos and drop Easter eggs and whatnot. If they choose to do it, don't get me wrong, it could be cool, and I trust Retro to do it very well. But I feel like they're smart enough to be focused on just Sylux and whatever other larger threat that I just also have a prediction will be as a part of this game and the story. Now, if there is anything to do with other hunters in this game, the way I could see them doing it is just subtle teases in maybe some of the lore that you scan throughout the game and the environment in the world. And if you're scanning more space pirate or enemy computers and accessing their logs like you do in the prior Prime games, especially Prime 1, that is how I could see them maybe offhandedly referencing Weevil, or I guess you could even say anyone else from the Prime universe, but specifically focusing on the hunters. Maybe through scanning, there's a couple of offhanded references, maybe even a picture. That could be kind of cool. But I don't expect them to actually appear in some sort of real form in this game. Just a guess, but that is my guess. Could there be a run button or a roll button? Yeah, I think so. You're right. We have no indication as to new controls based on this, 90 seconds of gameplay in that trailer. We just don't. So we mostly saw gameplay that echoes everything we've seen from the prior games. That's all we know for now. New missiles, new upgrades, new abilities, new morph ball things, new beams and ammo and whatever they're going to do, we don't know any of that stuff yet. But I do think some kind of a run button or something that adds to her agility very likely will be a part of this game. Next question comes from Feral King at Feral King 422, who says there's a lot of talk about whether or not Prime 4 can sell in 5 to 10 million range. And some people, like myself, think that can only happen if the game has multiplayer. Do you think it needs multiplayer to sell that well, or can it without it? Great question. Lots of questions about multiplayer stuff in this Q&A, guys. So that definitely is something on everyone's mind. So to answer the real thrust of the question, yes, I think this game can sell 5 to 10 million units. I think it'll probably be the best-selling Metroid game ever, besting Metroid Dread, which is somewhere in like the 3.2-ish million range or so. And I think I've said for even years that 5 million is probably the target for this game. So I do think it can do it no matter what happens, especially if there's a Switch and a Switch 2 component. And if they do that and deliver that and promote that well through all of their marketing and the hype of the next-gen console, huge opportunity for this game to sell 5 million or more for sure. Now, does it need multiplayer to do so? It's a great question, and I really, honestly don't know. I'm all for multiplayer. There's another question about it, so I won't jump ahead to that. And it makes sense to think that with multiplayer, something to keep the game in the conversation for longer, that yeah, maybe that could aid in people choosing to buy this game for a longer period of time to help it reach 5 to 10 million. I don't think it's necessarily a requirement because I think the single player game alone has enough hype behind it. Again, if Switch 2 is also a part of it, to hit 5 million or more. But if there is a multiplayer mode and if it's a good multiplayer mode, if both single player and multiplayer just knock it out of the park, then yeah, I guess it's only fair to say that it would only aid in the game selling even better. Okay, next question comes from someone. I am so sorry if I pronounce your name wrong because I probably will, but I'm going to do my best. Comes from Niklas Krabsethvi. I have no idea if that's correct. At Krabsethvi. I sure hope I said that right, man. But Niklas asks me, do you think at this point that Nintendo will make it beginner friendly with some sort of intro or prologue, or will we get remasters before the release? Great question. Another commonly asked question in this round here was a lot of people asking about the remasters of Prime 2 and 3. Everyone's asking about other bounty hunters. Everyone's asking about multiplayer. Everyone's asking about Primes 2 and 3 getting remasters. I don't think that's another one of my questions coming up, but I obviously have to touch on it here. So here's the thing. I think that there is absolutely a plan to make this game accessible to newcomers. Even though it's Metroid Prime number 4, they kept 4 in the title, which I always believed they would, and a lot of people thought they might drop the number 4. I'm glad they kept it in, but I understand the concern that some people might feel too intimidated to make Metroid Prime number 4 their first Metroid Prime game if they haven't played the others. And maybe it'll prevent people from buying it who might otherwise consider it. So if Nintendo is smart, and let's not forget, you guys, they handled this perfectly with Metroid Dread, which was Metroid 5, and they made sure everyone knew it is a sequel to Fusion, and it's the 5th in the 2D series, but also here's a ton of marketing and promotion and whatever they called those bounty hunter logs from the website, and they tweeted like crazy to let people know this is how to get caught up on the series. And the game itself featured a catch-up. Very quick, very well delivered, very efficient in its timing to get people caught up on the events of 1 through 4. Other M wasn't referenced, but it is referenced in kind of some of the bonuses after you beat the game. They made sure to catch people up for Metroid Dread, and that game sold over 3 million copies very quickly and became the best-selling Metroid game of all time. There's even more hype and more of a knowledge base of the larger gaming community of Metroid Prime 4 because it's been a mystery for so long. Now the trailer has been revealed. It's amazing. Everyone loves it, blown away. Everyone is aware of it and talking about it. Even people who aren't big Metroid fans are talking about it. So if they make sure in the marketing buildup and in the game itself to include a Metroid Dread type, here's the story so far thing, I think they can easily get people caught up. They do not need to do Prime 2 and 3 remastered, right? Primes 2 and 3 remastered before Prime 4 comes out. Just my opinion. Now, would we all like them to do that? Absolutely. Would it be better for them to do that? Absolutely. But do they need to? My opinion is no. If they do the intro prologue correctly, they don't have to do those before Prime 4. Okay, last Twitter question comes from Jacob Kroschel at JKFisherman01, if I said that correctly as well, who said, this is a big one, you guys. Would you like Samus to speak more in Prime 4? And if so, who would she be speaking to? An AU unit? I think you mean Aurora unit? Federation Admiral, Adam, or some other character? Great question. And yes, I do have strong opinions on that one. Look, guys, I don't care what anyone says. I am all about Samus speaking. Now, of course, you have to do it well because they've barely ever treaded into that territory. And the one time they did big, people didn't like it, which is this game right here, Metroid Other M, which people very much do not like, much to my chagrin and breaking my heart because I do like that game. But there are reasons to understand why, because even I'll admit, as much as I like that game, it's not amazing. There are a ton of flaws, a lot of great ideas that they didn't execute perfectly, and I do like Samus's introspective thought. I like the story they told. I liked learning more about her as a person and a woman. I've talked about this before, and I know the Japanese original text tells a better story than the American or the English language translation. Yes, this is all true. But what they did was still good. However, maybe not the best executed. There were some overly melodramatic elements that they added to it. And the voice acting, I think, is good. I know what they were going for, but it turned people off at the time. So, the way she spoke in Dread, I think we all love that. She spoke Chozo. She said one freaking line, and it was so powerful and emotional. I think that they can strike a balance between the other M version and the Metroid Dread version. I don't need her to be speaking like crazy, if I'm being honest, but some occasional lines, let's actually flesh her out a little bit. Yes, I welcome it very, very much. Now, do I need it? Definitely not. Do I want it? I don't really know, actually. I don't know if I want it. I think it's more that I'm open to it, and if I learned it was a part of this game, I would be over the moon and very excited, and I've always wanted to learn and know more about Samus as a person. People have this very specific desire and image in their heads of Samus where she's silent, she's stoic, she shows no emotion, she talks to no one, she's just a silent, badass killer. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, of course I love that idea, and she's almost always been that, and she's my favorite character. So I love that, but I think that you can still keep that image of her alive while also still fleshing her out as a person, which includes having her speak. So it has to be handled with a deft hand. They have to really have a strong vision and the right voice actress behind it. But in the right story, in the right game, with the right kind of dialogue and the right actress, absolutely you can have a great version of Samus that speaks in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. We're now moving over to YouTube to answer some questions, and the first question from YouTube comes from @tippedjosh6802, who says, do you think Sylux will be another character that we already know? Ah, yes, the Sylux mystery. There are a lot of questions that I think most of us have surrounding Sylux's possible identity. And a lot of this is stemming from, there has been a long time theory that Sylux might actually be Samus's brother Solomon, who was referenced, I believe, in the Metroid manga. And that's never really been confirmed to be totally true and totally canon. So it's definitely a bit of a reach. Like I said, pretty much created by the fans. Could there be something interesting there? Absolutely. I think it would be very cool to kind of, I've already spent even time in this video and in this Q&A discussing how I want to know about more of Samus as a person and as a woman, which could include her history and any possible living family she has. We know her parents were killed when she was dead. We also know now that Ravenbeak is some kind of surrogate father because of the Metroid DNA or the Chozo DNA transplant that happened when she was young. Of course, we don't know, based on where in the timeline this game may happen, whether or not she even knows about that yet, because currently that's during Dread at the very end of the timeline. And so, like I said, yes, I want to learn more about Samus as a person, learning of her living brother as a surprise, and the fact that he might even be evil or somebody who's hunting her in the form of Sylux, hiding behind the identity of Sylux. All very interesting, but at the end of the day, I don't really want the brother thing to be true for Sylux. And I also don't even necessarily know if Sylux just will be somebody that we know, or somebody that we've met before. Like, oh, Sylux is Gandrada. Sylux is Admiral Dane. Like, I don't know, Sylux is Anthony. I just don't think any of that stuff is going to happen. And I don't think that we need it. Now, I'm obviously open to a couple of different avenues they can go as far as maybe telling us who Sylux is. Do they reveal that there is a secret identity at all to Sylux, even if it's a totally new character? They certainly might do that, and I'm very open to seeing that because I like the idea of them continuing to go cinematic. Remember, I liked the only overtly cinematic Metroid game, which was Other M. So I'm certainly willing to welcome that in the future, but my personal kind of Metroid fanboy vision for Sylux, and I'm not saying this is what they have to do, it's just my vision in my own head before I play Metroid Prime 4, my vision for him is just that he's just a bounty hunter. There have been other bounty hunters that have interacted or had contracts with the Galactic Federation in the past. Obviously, Samus is like universe, galaxy renowned and famous. And we know that Sylux doesn't like the Federation, doesn't like Samus, hence some of the contention there, and whatever might be happening to lead him to following her into the events of Metroid Prime 4. But I don't know that I necessarily need anything deeper than that. I feel like a larger threat that looms above Sylux becomes something more interesting to me as far as what layers there are. I don't necessarily need that to Sylux. So that's kind of my general desire. However, I will end this by just reminding you that I'm open to whatever they do. Sylux is a very popular fan character. I like Sylux. I'm glad he's here. So if they want to give us more about his identity, I'm totally cool with that. Next YouTube question comes from Will QU6XC, who says, do you think there will be a multiplayer mode? And would you like that inclusion or prefer it to stick to a single player experience? So, like I said earlier, there was a multiplayer question I was going to answer. And also a lot of people, many of you guys, were asking me about multiplayer in Metroid Prime 4. Will they do it? Should they do it? Do you want it? Would it be good? Would it be bad? So this is the question I chose to kind of, cover that, cast the widest net, and answer that question. Do I think there will be a multiplayer mode? Man, tough to say. I think I'm in like the 60-40 range in favor of single player only. So 60% probably no multiplayer, but a very sizable 40% says they very much might in the world of online gaming and multiplayer gaming and the NSO, their online network, and they've seen insane success with online connected games. Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and Splatoon. And Metroid has had multiplayer modes in the past. Offline with Metroid Prime 2 and online with Metroid Prime Hunters and Federation Force. So, there's definitely a world where they do it. So that's why I have that large 40% of me that says they might do it. But for some reason, I'm still, again, ever so slightly, I'm not super confident, ever so slightly leaning towards predicting that it will be single player only mode. And would I prefer that? Probably, just because I still think of Metroid as a single player franchise, and especially the Prime first person series, these campaigns, these stories, however they're going to add on to the lore and the adventure of Prime in a Prime 4 titled Beyond. It's all very exciting to me, and it's what I want the most. However, I am all about a good, it's the key word here, a good multiplayer mode. Whether or not they take the co-op Federation Force idea and they just make it work better in a console game, of course I'm up for that. Competitive, multiplayer, co-op multiplayer, team deathmatch, or different modes, whatever. If they find a way to do something with multiplayer that's super high quality, I'm definitely excited for it, and it would be the first multiplayer game in a long time I'd actually be into, simply because I'm a Metroid fanboy. And on top of that, it's worth noting that many people have been concerned that Retro developing a multiplayer mode is going to take away from the quality or the length of content in the single player campaign. Like they couldn't give their all in the campaign if they're also spending time in multiplayer. And I don't personally believe that. I don't think that they would risk the quality of either mode in this game because it's so important for Metroid Prime 4 to be good. And I just trust in their development skills, Retro's development skills. Now, we know that people who worked on Call of Duty got hired by Retro to work on Metroid Prime 4. That happened many, many years ago. I discussed it on videos. And so that's somebody who might just be helping from the first-person gameplay perspective, but they might also be helping for developing online multiplayer competitive modes as well in a first-person perspective. The sky's the limit there. And I will say that the one benefit to it, beyond the fact that I just think it would be fun, and I don't think it would hurt the single player, the other benefit to it is, again, if it is good. That caveat is so important every time I talk about it as a possibility. If it's good, what it has the benefit of doing is, I said this earlier too, keeping Metroid Prime 4 in the conversation for longer, giving it a longer life beyond just the initial release and the first couple of months where everyone picks it up right away and we play it and we beat it and we freak out and we talk about it for a few weeks and then we move on. And over the years, the occasional person picks it up, obviously, and continues to buy and play it. But the main thrust of the conversation around the game in Samus will, for the most part, die down after a few months. I will be keeping it going because you guys know me. This is what I do. I talk about Metroid no matter how dry the drought is. Look at the 10 years of my YouTube channel and tell me that that's not true. Pre-Metroid Dread, pre-Metroid Prime 4, I'm talking about Metroid. It's what I do. But again, the larger conversation would go away. So a quality multiplayer, if they release updated content and the single player is fantastic as well, people will keep playing it, buying it, talking about it, downloading new content. And yeah, I think it could be good for the game in the long term. Next up comes @ChrisPork1443, who says, I'm hoping the Speed Booster and Shine Spark finally make their Metroid Prime debut in Beyond? Which power-up that hasn't been featured in the Metroid Prime games do you want to see? Great question. We actually talked about this a little bit on the podcast as well last weekend. And, here's the thing. The Speed Booster and the Shine Spark are definitely two that I'd like to see show up. They're kind of basically part of the same general ability, right? I think it could be very cool. I talked about on that podcast how I really enjoyed how Metroid Other M in 3D third person incorporated the Speed Booster by just, if you have enough of a runway to just run without stopping or turning, her back jets turn on and she gets this crazy speed burst and you can Shine Spark, and it's really dope and really well handled and super, super fun. But that happened automatically. I don't think it would be as easy to do that in a first-person Prime game. I do think if they incorporated it, it might be something that goes into third person. But as some people have mentioned, if there's a certain button, like a run button, or a button that makes her do that into third person that becomes your speed booster once you unlock that ability, that is a way I could see them incorporating it. Basically a combination of like prior 2D and Other M versions, and also how they do it in Other M. I think that there's a really cool concept there. We have also seen the screw attack. People sometimes forget in the Prime games. We've had the screw attack. That goes into third person as you press that button, and she's just screw attacking along and going across long distances and chasms and stuff. So, to answer your last question, which one that we haven't seen featured in Prime would I like to see? I think that there's... Well, here's the thing. I was about to say the wall jump, and there has been a version of the wall jump. Now... It was relegated to certain walls that allowed you to do it. Like in Prime 3, you'd get these certain like multicolored shiny walls that would be back and forth, and you would jump against them. And similar to how it becomes a third-person side view for something like the screw attack, you bounce back and forth between those, which is kind of like the wall jump from Super Metroid. So maybe I would say a wall jump that isn't restricted by that. If there's a way to incorporate wall jump into first-person platforming that feels Metroid, but also feels like it works in Metroid Prime, and again, first person, third person, however they would decide to do it, that would be a classic Samus move. Again, not restricted to just specific walls and areas. I mean, any wall you want to jump off of, you could do it. That would be something pretty cool to see if they could do it well in this game. Next up comes at Saladoc, who says, if Prime 4 is cross-gen, which is extremely possible, do you think it would be a big jump in graphics in comparison to the Switch version, or will it just be a little upgrade in resolution and performance and that's it? Because this will be the first time that a cross-gen game will have a big jump in horsepower. It won't be like Twilight Princess, where the Wii was a little more powerful than the GameCube. Same as Breath of the Wild with the Wii U and Switch. And if that's the case and they take advantage of the power of the Switch 2, what recent game could you think of to compare it to technically? So, a lot going on there. In general, if this is cross-gen, do I expect a big power and graphic jump? Ultimately, is I think what the question is in regards to Metroid Prime 4. You bring up a great point that the last two times they did this with Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, the technology between the two cross-generation consoles that those games released on was very, very similar. GameCube to Wii and Wii U to Switch, they were all just similar in capability and graphics and horsepower and all that stuff. You get slight jumps, but neither of the newer versions of those two games really looked or felt any different from the prior versions. So, if we get the cross-gen launch version like we all think might happen, do we see a significant difference with Metroid Prime 4? And I tend to think yes, because it's very important this time for Nintendo to be able to show the power jump and the graphics jump for the Switch 2, whatever that's going to be. The Switch has been so successful that in order to keep that momentum up, I think they need to show that it's more than just the exact same thing with like slightly different joysticks, or a slightly different gyro motion control gimmick or something like that. They want to really showcase the power. That's what's going to get people really on board and excited for the Switch 2, coming off of the mega successful Switch. Just in my opinion and prediction. That's kind of my feeling. And so I think that Metroid Prime 4 really would be one of the most ideal games to do that. So if we get one that's like, a version of Metroid Prime 4 and the Switch 2 that's like 4K, and that just has way better, lighting and particle effects and depth of field view and all these things, ray tracing and stuff that I am not smart enough to understand, but it just looks way better. Imagine if it could look almost as good as like The Last of Us Part 2 or something. Even though it wouldn't be realistic like that game is. It's still going for the stylized Metroid Prime kind of art style. That could be incredible, and it could get people really, really excited. And you ask what game I would compare it to, like recent game that I would compare Switch 2 version to. I think an easy one, and this is kind of low-hanging fruit, but I think it really applies, and it would be the Doom games, specifically Doom Eternal and what we've seen of the new Doom. I think it's called the Dark Ages, which looks amazing. I think if we get a Metroid Prime 4 on the Switch 2, that can look, and it already looks almost that good in my opinion, honestly, anyway, if I'm being real. It just looks fantastic running on the Switch in 60 frames per second. But if we get one that looks even that much more close to like to Doom Eternal or the Dark Ages, I think that would just be amazing. You know, maintains that Metroid Samus art style and world design, but with that much more next-gen clarity and resolution and just speed of movement and whatever they want to do with it to match something like Doom Eternal, I think it could be really incredible. So the jury is out on this one. This is all fan speculation when it comes to the Switch 2 version, but I tend to feel that way. Next up comes at Rikakaka, if I said that, Rikakoka, says, do you think Phazon will return somehow? Great question. This came up on the podcast. I am thinking heavily about this. I want to believe yes, because I think it makes sense, even if it's something that just has more to do with whatever larger threat is going to be in this game and less about Phazon itself actually just being in the game. I don't know. I feel like it has to exist. Now, Tanabe's quotes back in 2015 that I referenced in my last Metroid video, he did say that with Prime 3, he wrapped up the story of Dark Samus and Phazon. So, in theory, that means that Phazon probably shouldn't be in this game, and I'm totally willing to buy that and see what happens next. But something I can't shake, and I will be making a video on this soon, is how I think Metroid Prime as an entity and an enemy has to play some role in this game somehow. And if time travel comes into effect, that's how Metroid Prime or Phazon could actually play a more integral role, because maybe Sylux or Samus is moving, you know, Phazon around to help, you know, space pirates in the current day recreate Metroid Prime. He goes back in time before Phazon was destroyed to bring it back into the future time to make another Metroid Prime and more experiments with Metroids or whatever. And same to go steal Metroids or whatever the case. So time travel could help this happen. And I just feel like there's different theories on this. You know, the fact that the game is called Metroid Prime 4 tells me that the entity of Metroid Prime, which already Phazon is baked into that story anyway, should have something to do with this game. Now, people will counter that by saying, at this point, after Prime 3, Metroid Prime as a title is just more about the series and the first-person gameplay than it is about the story that happened in the first 3 games or continuing the enemy known as Metroid Prime. And I don't necessarily believe that here and now. However, once Prime 4 comes out, and if we learn that that's the choice they make, I understand it. So I understand the thinking. I think it could play out that way. And I'm open to the possibility that Prime 4 comes out and does completely banish the Metroid Prime enemy. And we have moved on. And Metroid Prime is now just a nomenclature for a series and no longer refers to the story. But just as a fan, and as a Metroid Prime super fan, I kind of just want Phazon and Metroid Prime and that to somehow play a role in this. And I'll remind you again at the end, I think that if there's a time travel element, I could sort of see that being an avenue to keep Phazon in the story of this game. We are coming to the end. 2 questions to go. The next one comes from Thieving Birds, who says, do you think the control scheme will be modernized, or do you see them offering different options? Split Joy-Con, more similar to Metroid Prime 3, traditional Prime controls, etc. And then Al also says, check out his or her band, on streaming services. So I really was excited for this question because I think talking about and exploring the controls is an important thing to do. And it's so funny. It shows how long this has been a conversation, you guys. Because, like, 4 or 5 years ago, I think I made a video about the possibility of Metroid Prime 4's controls. Maybe even pre-COVID, I was thinking about it and discussed it as an option. Pre-Metroid Prime Remastered. This is important because, especially if there's a Switch 2 version as well, there's a lot of different ways this game might be able to be controlled. The good thing is Metroid Prime Remastered did show us how it could be done. You've got traditional dual analog controls. You've got traditional GameCube controls. You've got Pro Controller with motion, and you've got split Joy-Con with motion, like you said, emulating the kind of Wii Remote and Nunchuck for Metroid Prime 3 and the Metroid Prime trilogy. And so that's a bunch of options. I expect all of those to be available in Metroid Prime 4. If there is a Switch 2 version of this game, and if the Switch 2 has another even quirkier control idea that we don't yet know about, then you can just throw that one into the mix and add even another possible control scheme. The only other thing that's worth noting here, and I'm okay with all of those control schemes. I even still nostalgically love the GameCube controls. I have no problem with them. They are very awkward and strange, but they worked for the game at the time. I love them, even though I think the best way I've ever played is just the standard dual analog on Metroid Prime Remastered. And I say that as a fan of the motion controls as well, so I'm not a motion control hater. But the dual analog just worked so well for Metroid Prime Remastered. So there's no wrong answer to me. The only other thing I want to add is this game could also just introduce new abilities, new items, new controls, new scenarios that need things to be and play differently than any Metroid Prime game has before. So beyond just the kinds of controller that we're going to be holding, could also be new gameplay mechanics we've never seen introduced in Metroid Prime 4 that could also change the whole conversation around controls, which to me is just an exciting thing to think about. And here we are, we've made it to the end, the last question of this very long Q&A. This comes from Oscar Valdez 5621 on YouTube. And Oscar asks me, do you think adding time travel can ruin the Metroid series timeline, desolate what, I think you mean to say maybe decimate what some think? I think Metroid has a nice, cleanish, thin line that I would hate to see her muddled up. Okay, so I'm going to read, maybe English isn't your first language, which is totally fine, or maybe that was just not the best phrased sentence. Ultimately, this question is, would time travel in Metroid Prime 4 mess up the timeline? You seem to think that right now the timeline is very clean and straightforward, which is mostly true, but with some caveats, and you would hate to see it muddied up with time travel. It's a great question. I wanted this to be the last one because clearly I've been very invested in both when Metroid Prime 4 takes place in the timeline and if there is time travel on top of that. So I will say this. You mentioned that the timeline is very clean currently. Technically, that is true because you can follow every game, every spin-off, Metroid Prime, Pinball, Federation Force, anything. You can follow it from the first game to Dread in a straight line. Now, the less clean part is the fact that all of the releases have jumped around in where they take place. So it's not like we've been following Metroid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yada, 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 prime, in the order that they take place. The games have released in weird, different, out-of-order sections, but the timeline is a straight line to your point. Could timeline mess that up? And the answer is yes. It could mess it up either by design, because Retro and Nintendo want to throw things into chaos or cause a split timeline like the Zelda games, or it could mess things up because they mess it up. They screw it up, they don't think of something properly, and they don't account for something, and all the fans realize that everything is broken because of a time-traveling choice they made, or it just becomes too convoluted and maybe they try harder than they need to get a complex timeline thing going and it just doesn't land properly. It's one of the two. Either they want it to be chaotic and it's exactly what their desired effect is, or they just kind of screw it up. As I've said, I don't think Retro and Nintendo are going to screw it up, so I'm not really thinking this one is the option. I like the idea of them wanting to throw things into chaos and make us scratch our heads a little, and by the time the game is over, we're like, what the hell happened? What does this mean for the timeline? And when this was here and that was there and this happened at this time, and then what's going to happen next in the next game and yada yada. I'm all about that. And so I think that's why I've been so excited about where Metroid Prime 4 takes place in the timeline, which I've said is in a couple of different places, or if there is time travel in this game, which I believe in time travel more and more as each passing day goes on. And again, I've made, two very long videos discussing and breaking this down and going over screenshots and video clips. So if you want, you can go watch my prior videos where I discuss these two topics at length. And so at the end of the day, those exact two topics, when does this game take place and will there be time travel? Huge points of contention, huge topics of debate. And a lot of people who are deep in the Metroid lore, like me and probably you watching, we care about this stuff. We want to know how this game will fit into the timeline and what time travel will do if it's here. Will it be good time travel? Will it be bad time travel? Will it make things worse for the timeline? Or will it make things better like I want to believe it will? All of this stuff. So I'm open to see what they do. I have faith in them, but like I said, they do have to do it the right way. And so that wraps up this Q&A, man. A long Q&A, lots of great questions from you guys. Thank you so much. I enjoyed answering these. I enjoyed talking about Metroid Prime 4 till my breath runs out, you know, till my eyes and ears bleed. I just am so excited, you know, being able to discuss this stuff. And I love hearing where your guys' heads are at, the questions that you're thinking about, the things you post to me, the topics you want to hear me talk about. I like giving you shout outs and all that stuff. So I'll remind you again, follow me on Twitter because I discuss this with people a lot there, and I put these Q&A shout outs on Twitter as well. And obviously I got, like I said, like 200 questions. I only answered 14. So if I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry. I did the best I could to grab a variety and cover a variety of topics. So hopefully a question you had was maybe answered in a roundabout way through somebody else's question. I tried to do that as best I could. But either way, I'll do one of these again, maybe in a couple of months. I love the Q&As. I appreciate you guys following and interacting and asking me questions. Let's just be excited for Metroid Prime 4, and we'll call it a wraps. I'll see you next time on another Metroid video.